Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get to the webinar. My name is Allie DeYoung. I'm the project manager with the Youth Employment Solutions Center. We're really excited to bring this webinar to you today. I'm going to start with just some quick information before we get started. We have an ASL interpreter joining us today. So once we get going with the presentation, it will just be the presenter and the interpreter videos that you'll see. Captioning is being provided. We're going to post the link in the chat box now for you to access that in a separate browser. And all presentation materials are available on our website, which we'll share in the chat box as well. And then you'll receive a link in the follow-up email after today's webinar. Along with the materials, we will be providing a recording of this webinar along with part 1, and then part 3 of our webinar series, which will happen next week. And at the end, we're going to have our presentation today. At the end, we'll do a question and answer. And then following the webinar, there'll be a brief post-event survey. So I wanted to take a chance to share a little bit about the YES Center before we jump in. So the YES Center is the National Training and Technical Assistance Center for the Partnerships and Employment State Projects, focused on systems change for improving employment for youth with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So you can learn more about that on our website. And at this time, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Sean Roy, who's going to introduce our presenter today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Allie. And welcome, everybody. My name is Sean Roy. I'm with the YES Center and also with Transcend, who is a partner on the YES Center. And we're very excited today to have Shea join us for this topic. The topic has gotten great response. And as we were talking before the webinar got going, we think that people are hungry for information related to technology and the use of technology, but rethinking the role of technology. So again, this is the second part, and very happy. Thank you, Shea, for being here. Let me read her bio as a formal introduction. Emily Shea Tanis, PhD, is the Director for Policy and Advocacy at the Coleman Institute for Cognitive Disabilities at the University of Colorado. Go Buffs. Dr. Tanis has been a member of the Coleman Institute team since 2010 as a Coleman Fellow, and quickly advancing into the roles of the Associate Director, Acting Executive Director, and now the Co-Director for the Institute under the new organizational structure. Dr. Tanis is also on the faculty of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus, where she has published articles and investigated the definition of intellectual disability, the measurement of adaptive behavior and support need, the construct of self-determination, federally funded supports and services for people with IDD and their families, and self-directed employment strategies. She is nationally recognized for her expertise in applied cognitive technology supports and advancing the rights of people with IDD to technology and information access. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Shea.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to join you all today. I am absolutely just thrilled to be here, particularly because I run another project of national significance, which is our longitudinal data project called State of the States and Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. And it's always a great opportunity when the projects can come together and share expertise and be able to touch a larger audience. So thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to join you all today. As my introduction said, I am co-director at the Coleman Institute for Cognitive Disabilities, and I'm going to make sure I'm advancing my slides correctly. There we go. And really my goal and my job at the Institute is to make sure that we reinforce the mission of catalyzing and integrating technologies to promote meaningful quality of life for people with cognitive disabilities. We do that, when we look at technology, we look at solutions, it not only touches those with cognitive disabilities, but all individuals, as you'll see, when we start to look at the construct of disability and social construct. So what are we going to do today, as an educator, and the previous presenter, we come out of special ed, and so we like to start with our objectives and the things that you're going to learn during this presentation. So some of the things I hope you'll walk away with are being able to describe the opportunities that are being provided through the current economic and socio-political climate. Be able to discover innovative and disruptive technologies that can encourage autonomy, self-efficacy, resilience, and enhanced employment for people with disabilities, as well as understanding the relationships and alignments between some of our systems change efforts. Predominantly, I'll focus on technology first, which is a movement across the states, and employment first. So just to get us started, we now all understand we're in this age of disruption. Really, disruption is this disturbance where it interrupts our activities, our processes, and the way we traditionally think about how we do our work and how systems navigate. So what is impacting us right now? A number of things are. Certainly the pandemic, our economic recession, which is impacting employment, civil unrest and social injustices, climate changes and natural disasters. I'm here in Colorado where we're fighting some very large forest fires, foreign conflict, as well as mistrust of technology, which we have become very reliant on in this social isolation period during COVID. But how does some of this impact our students? How does it impact the youth with disabilities? Well, looking at some of the more recent reports that are coming out, we're just really now capturing, I would say, some firm data on how COVID is impacting young adults. And when we look at some of the reports out of the CDC, we're seeing that, it's impacting them due to the change in routines, certainly virtual learning, and continuity of their learning process, how they obtain information in different forms, the cultural impacts of COVID and these other influences, disruptors. Some are experiencing a loss of natural supports with family members working and others working in that disruption of the schedule, a loss of security and safety, can be economic insecurities, as well as health and wellness. So when thinking about working with transition age youth, these are some of the things that need to be in the back of our heads that they are facing at this current time. And before I forget, I'm going to say a big thank you to our interpreter and our closed captioner, and I will try to slow my speech down. So thank you. So even though we have all of this conflict going on currently, there is an opportunity, and we've seen innovation born out of crisis before. This is an image of Vesta Stout. It's a black and white image of a woman who in 1943 had 2 sons serving in the Navy in World War II. Vesta Stout, as a mother, concerned mother, wanted to give back while her 2 sons were away at war and started working at the Green River Ordnance Plant in Illinois, where she packed boxes of ammunition to be sent off to soldiers at war. But what she found when she was doing that is a problem. She found that there was tape that was used to seal the boxes of ammunition that were then covered with wax to make them waterproof. The problem being that when soldiers in the midst of a fight were trying to open the ammunition boxes, the tape would rip and they would be unable to get that critical ammunition during wartime. So she decided, as a mother of 2, to do something about it. She came up with an innovation. Now, I challenge you to think of what that innovation was, something that would help, a different form of tape that would help during this time that was both waterproof and very strong. Vesta Stout was the solution for her was duct tape, what we commonly use today. That was the waterproof sealant that then became used after she wrote a letter to President Roosevelt during that time saying this needs to be a solution for our soldiers, for our sons. So as you can see, we have come up with many innovations during crisis, and now's the time to do it, certainly in our area. Why are we able to come up with innovations during crisis? Well, certainly there are a lot of reasons, but those at Harvard Business Publishing found there were really four main reasons that crisis drives innovation. It's because we end up looking at problem solving at the heart of everything. We unite around a common purpose. We see systems differently. They're the systems, we illuminate inefficiencies and illuminate challenges. So we start to see the systems differently. And there's also this bias towards action during crisis, knowing that something needs to be done immediately to support all of those around us. So we have this crisis. We have many crises going on, certainly now, that are more powerful than they have been in the past. But it also allows us to see disruption, to see where we can change the process. And a researcher named Rachel Botsman, who is the image on the screen, black and white image of Rachel Botsman, she researches how technology is transforming the social glue of society and how it's transforming trust between people. But she also has found in her research types of vulnerabilities that open the door for disruption in services, processes, and companies. And she came up with 5 main areas. And those 5 areas that open the door to disruption in organizations and services are the first being waste, where there's unlocked value and underused assets. Redundancy, where there are layers of superfluous roles and processes. Over complexity, so that frustrates customers' experiences. Limited access, so only a few are able to access what is provided. And broken trust. Now, as you think about these areas that open the door to disruption, I want you to start to think about our service delivery systems. I want you to think about our education systems. And what are those areas where we see waste, redundancy, complexity, limited access, and broken trust? So when I think about it, I think about things like, what are our current systems that are open to disruption, and how are we seeing that? Well, certainly our formal educations have been open to disruption, and we see that through some of the online efficiencies that we're now seeing with the learning process, testing, etc. I think we have the transition process is now open to disruption, that coordination, particularly the coordination of services and supports. When we look at redundancy and complexity, opportunities for self-direction. I think we've wasted a lot of opportunities for self-direction, and now we have a disruption that can allow for greater direction in services, supports, etc. Certainly employment services and supports, looking at those pre-employment transition services, how those are reviewed now in light of crisis. How do we apply work-based instruction? How do we apply self-advocacy instruction, as well as skill development? How do folks acquire new skills? We may find some either redundancy or some waste in the way people are acquiring new skills, the processes for that. Resource allocation, there's opportunities now for blending and flexibilities with the disruptions, how to use technology, programs, and services. Healthcare, certainly with HIPAA, we've seen a relaxation of HIPAA under the emergency response systems for COVID, and been able to see folks access that where they haven't been able to before. And federal programs for people with disabilities, looking at how do we reduce waste, limited access, broken trust, redundancy, and complexity. So who will flourish in these new environments? What are the groups? How are they going to adjust? What are the strategies, and what are the characteristics that they will have? Well, we know that nimble organizations, systems and services, those that are able to change and pivot, that I think that every time I hear the word pivot, if somebody gave me $1, I'd be a millionaire by now. We are all pivoting, but that's also being nimble. Programs and services that adapt and capitalize on the shifting landscapes. So there you will see that there are new companies, new startups that are really capitalizing on the new climate. So delivery services is a great example. When you see restaurants shifting to be able to do home deliveries, they're being able to adapt and capitalize on this new normal. Certainly those that are in reinforcing and utilizing meaningfully technology programs, being able to use, transformation, digital transformation was a key phrase last year and has been for a couple of years. So those that were already on their way to some digital transformation are able to flourish. And then also those who are non-traditional workers. And when I say non-traditional workers, I do include people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, those with most significant disabilities, and those with disabilities in general, because they can do things, they have the skill sets, the specialized honed skill sets to be able to apply during this unique period of time. And can also, those who also demonstrate 21st century job skills. So when we look at what those are, because I think it's important as we build future leaders, as we are trying to build new structures, new support systems, what are the things we need to focus on and enhancing for this new community of employees or job seekers or our new workforce? Well, we certainly, some of the new strategies, some of the things that large companies, Fortune 500 companies were looking at prior to COVID are still consistent now, but almost have been of higher value now because of the type of criteria that they produce in a good employee. So some of the areas, the value job skills that we need to be looking at, either fostering, training, or enhancing, are those who are really good at time management. So time management engineers, people who can adjust their time. I will say I am probably not a good time management engineer because during COVID, it's been difficult to manage the balancing of different activities, home and work life. But being a good time management engineer allows you to structure your time and use it efficiently. Those who are agile or have transferable skills. I think we were talking about transferable skills before, and those are being able to justify those and demonstrate those. I know Jennifer White talked about transferable skills and demonstrating transferable skills in her presentation. That was part 1 of this series, but it's a very valued thing to be able to demonstrate those transferable skills. Also having cultural competency. And one of the things that is really important, I think, at this point to note is that there's also the disability culture, and being able to demonstrate the cultural competency within our own community, as well as leveraging that. That is a skill set. And that is also what makes you an authentic, or this community, authentic employees. And so thinking about how to leverage and use the cultural competency. Those who build social capital, we see that 56 minutes per every person's 8-hour workday is spent online in social media. But certainly being able to value that and understand that the larger social competence you have now, the greater you're able to connect with others in this challenging climate. And that also rolls into emotional intelligence, being able to read people's emotions and feel their emotions in different ways through different platforms can certainly be challenging. Data management skills, as we see more and more, the gathering of information, the deep dives into data, the deep dives into information, being able to manage and adjust for that. Human ingenuity and strategy, I think this has been the most valued during COVID, because you do have to come up with strategy and nuance and innovation. And then finally, certainly, and importantly for this conversation, is digital competence and technology related skills. So why is it so important? You know, we've been talking about technology at the Coleman Institute for 20 years. You know, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, of which we've talked about the right to technology for much of that time. And being there for over a decade, I've had the opportunity to see the transformation of people's adoption and interest in technology. I would say in the last 5 years, we've seen tremendous strides from employers, from the business sector, interested in technology. But why should we, as those who are engaged in this community, why is it really important for us to talk about technology right now? Well, I think it's pretty obvious that digital transformation is occurring, and it's occurring before our very eyes. Of every form and every area, every domain of living is being influenced by technology in some form. In fact, if you look at cybersecurity jobs, you will find that there is a cybersecurity job in every discipline. NIST will show you, the National Institutes of Science and Technology will show you what jobs can be applied in technology of every discipline in cybersecurity. But the technology has this potential, if not taken advantage of, if not embraced, to further marginalize the disability community, which undeniably will impact social determinants of health. It'll impact people's well-being. But the alternative is that we could activate the innovators of tomorrow and really cause education, public services, and even the job market to pivot, as we use that word constantly, to equity and quality. So it is our chance to take advantage of the technologies and use them to our advantage to drive the innovation. So let's talk a little bit about those innovative and emerging technology solutions that can be applied. So first I want to talk about just generalized tech. And then I want to talk about how you select it and why it's important to select it in a certain way. And I will say that I hope you had, those that are attending today, I hope you had the opportunity to listen to Jennifer's presentation prior to this, because she talked a lot about kind of the structure, the attitudinal barriers, as well as the social justice that colors our perceptions, that I think is very valuable coming into this conversation. So knowing that the ubiquity of technology is changing the world around us, we must figure out how we interact, survive, and thrive within this new world. And that means we have to teach others how to do that as well and provide opportunities for people to do that. But we are seeing, you know, as a data kind of geek, someone who collects longitudinal data, we do track data on what is going on with technology, particularly expenditures for technology across the states for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But globally, we know that people with disabilities in general are underutilizing technology. 23% in a 2017 Pew research said they never go online. I just recently did a presentation for Australia, and they mounted 77% of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities don't know why they would go online, have no interest, and don't even know why they would go online. So these are pretty consistent. People with disabilities have lower technology adoption rates and maintenance rates. They also have less access to smartphones. This was a 2018, the FINE survey that comes out of the ARC of the US. We also know, I mean, when you look at that compared to the 92% of people who own cell phones in the general population, that's pretty drastic. I believe it's 86% own smartphones specifically. 39% of people with disabilities say they can use the internet very well, meaning that we have low confidence rates in people being able to use technology, mainly because of the lack of exposure to it. And all of these factors are being exacerbated by COVID. So why are there such barriers to technology? What are the challenges that we're seeing? Well, there are a number of challenges, but the primary ones we see are the first being equal opportunity. And that means the gatekeepers. That means teachers, family members like myself, providers, etc., are preventing folks from accessing technology. Now, I will tell you, in a lot of our recent work at the Institute, this is becoming more and more evident through the rollout of nuanced technologies and what are now more mainstreamed technologies with built-in accessibility features. That being said, there are still challenges in lack of universal design or design of technologies where the accessibility is, we call it baked in, meaning that it comes in at the very beginning of a product design. And yes, we were seeing great strides in that, particularly in cognitive disabilities and cognitive accessibility, but we still have a ways to go. There is a lack of digital literacy and technical skills for folks with disabilities, which can be fostered in early education and opportunities. Knowledge translation, there are challenges with knowledge translation. And what I mean by that is, when we're using technology, how do we learn how to use that technology? Is the way we learn technology in plain and simple language? Is setting it up in plain and simple language? I don't know how many of you would say that setting up your iPhone was plain and simple language, but I know it can be difficult setting up those smartphones. Social context, there is still a social context and social barriers, attitudinal barriers, believing that people with disabilities cannot effectively use technology. They're too high risk to be able to use technology. It's not our job to decide, it's our job to educate. I think there are still systemic barriers, what we can and cannot fund through federal programs, as well as using systems to affirm use of technologies. Failure to address useworthiness alongside usability. This comes from one of our colleagues. Her name is Marcia Shearer out of New York. She runs a program called the Match for Technology and the Person. And useworthiness has to deal with whether or not a system is not only functional, does it provide the function it's supposed to be, but it's also beneficial in taking out and being seen. The good example is having a wheelchair that may get you from point A to point B, but if it's rickety and ugly and you don't want to be seen in it, chances are you're not going to use it as frequently. So making sure that you have alignment with useworthiness and usability. And then last, economic barriers. And I will say I put it last on purpose. And that is because we are seeing folks with under $20,000 earned annually purchasing cell phones. The priority has shifted so much that technology is so important that the economic barriers, people's priorities are focused on getting the technology. In fact, some will say, even teenagers in particular, will say they'd rather lose a finger than lose their cell phone. So the economic barriers still exist, don't get me wrong, but they're becoming less and less of a contributing factor to the access. And so, I lost one of my words. The big word that should be in the umbrella that somehow disappeared is technology solutions. So we have shifted our conversation in policy, and we have shifted our conversation in using access and training to moving away from what may be specialized equipment or AT or all these other phrases which are under this umbrella, such as, mainstream technology, connected technologies, health technologies, smart technologies, and simply talking about technology solutions. And the reason it is important, as many of you understand, the importance of using language, especially in our field, is that using a broad term like technology solutions opens the door for us to have future technologies, as well as use more mainstream accessible technologies that may or may not have the primary function of mediating an impairment. Usually when we talk about, assistive technologies or specialized technologies, their goal, and this is where we run into challenges with our policy and need to do some modernization of our policies, is that in order to utilize it, it has to quote unquote mediate the impairment. It has to deal with the functional capacities. But in our technologies today, they serve multiple functions and we should allow people to take advantage of those multiple functions. In fact, that's a good return on investment, right? That's a good investment when you can use a singular thing to do multiple activities. And so we are shifting our language to talk a lot more about technology solutions. as opposed to specialized technology terms. Now, this is a meme, and I use it because I think so often what we do when we're looking at technologies is we like to look at what's bright and shiny. This is a meme with a little child holding a pipe saying, "I have terrible news for you. You suffer from SOS, shiny object syndrome." Now, those of you, certainly in our field, defining by a medical term is entertaining. I also find it entertaining because my project of national significance is called State of the States, and we often use SOS as our acronym. Now I know it's shiny object syndrome. But it is a challenge when we're looking at applying technologies. We see folks buy things in bundles. I can't tell you how many groups we've worked with where they said, well, we just bought 20 iPads and applied them. Or this was a great new product that came out on the market that we saw one person use and it was great, so we just bought a bulk of them. We challenge you not to think that way in terms of just purchasing the bright and shiny. What we want people to really focus on is this person-centered approach to identifying technology solutions. And this aligns very closely with what is the functional model of disability, where we see the environment and we see the personal competence of an individual. And really what disability is manifested by is by that misfit between the environment and the individual. And we use technology solutions as the means for bridging or eliminating that misfit. So on the right, you will see an image of Dr. Hur. He's an MIT professor in prosthetic robotics. He also is an avid mountain climber. There's actually a film on him, a documentary on him. But if Dr. Hur was wearing pants in this image, he was scaling the side of a wall here in Colorado, where we have a lot of mountain climbers, there would not be the disability. You would not see the disability. You would just see a person rock climbing. Thus, the technology is helping to eliminate that barrier between the person and the environment. And so when looking for technology, looking to technology solutions, you need to think of it as a process. And we are capturing a lot of data across the nation about how people are selecting technologies through federal programs. And we encourage people to start to think and build it into those processes, those IEP plans and those person-centered plans, but not just checking the box of saying this is the technology. First, helping youth setting a goal. So it always starts, as we do in self-determination, and this aligns pretty closely with the self-determination or self-determined learning model of instruction. Really, how do folks learn how to problem solve? Well, starting folks by setting a goal, identifying what that goal is and what strengths they have that will help them to achieve that goal. Once you've identified what strengths and assets they have, identifying the challenges or environmental demands that may create the barriers to goal achievement. And only then do you identify or do you start to search for technology solutions to fill the gap. So the process is not just we want to buy an iPad, but you want to identify a solution that will serve a purpose that is outcome driven. The technology should always be outcome driven. So what are some other considerations when identifying technologies? Because we have a lot of folks who say, listen, I just don't know where to start. I don't know what type of technologies would be good. There's so much coming out. Isn't there a catalog? Well, the problem is the catalogs would never be able to keep up with the pace of technology. So starting with a goal first helps you to narrow. You want to make sure that self-directed looking at feature matching. So feature matching is not a formal assessment, but matching people's strength sets to that technology, making sure it helps them to accomplish the goal. Looking at things that are universally designed. We're seeing a large movement in terms of procurement of technologies and making sure that they are universally designed and being able to be accessible at all forms, and also given the opportunity to trial those products or trial those technologies. Now, I want to make a special note that this can work for anything, but there is, we do have certified AT specialists or certified medical professionals that if you're looking for really specialized equipment, they're the right people to go to. They have that expertise. But there are also opportunities to look to other solutions where you may not need that formal assessment for. And as many of you who have worked in transition, many of you who have worked with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have to understand that even in the selection of technology, you have to consider the family. Now, this is a term, collective family empowerment, actually comes out of the collective empowerment, comes from that term that came out of professional parent partnerships in education. We've adapted it to look at a collective family and empowerment. And the reason why is because the collective family is becoming more and more influential in the use of technology, as well as supports and advancing kind of expectations for folks with disabilities. So those family members are critical. We always have to understand, particularly too, when we're selecting and looking at technologies, cultural, linguistic, and behavioral preferences. Understanding that entire family unit. I've worked and been a part of the National Sibling Leadership Network, and siblings are providing quite a bit of care as well as advancing technology solutions and the use of those. When we talk to big companies, we talk about families and service providers being auxiliary markets. Now, understanding kind of the landscape when you're looking at technologies, if one person in the family is using say an Android, not that there's any preference there, but say they're using it, they're more likely to adopt and support another person using it within their home. And we know, from our national data collection and our projects of national significance, over 70% of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities live their lives, adult lives, with family members. So embracing those technologies with these groups must always consider the family supports engaged as well. So I would be remiss if I did not talk just briefly or mention, if you're in procurement, the principles of universal design. I will say there are now 2 that I'm aware of very good programs for procurement of technologies that will walk you through guidance. One comes out of the Partnerships in Employment and Accessible Technology, a project funded under the Department of Labor, and another one comes out of the American Association for People with Disabilities. They both have kind of guidance on how to do procurement of accessible technologies and accessible services and supports. But when you're looking for them, keep in mind these ideas of universal design, things like equitable use, flexibility in use, low physical effort, simple and intuitive use, tolerance for error, perceptible information, and a size and space and approach for use. These are important just when you're looking at technologies to consider if those elements are included. And much of what we're working in systems thinking is, we on IEPs and in person-centered plans, we always said, there's the box, the famous box of check this off if you considered technology. We're shifting people to start to think about, in your planning and in your process, I want to know why you're not using technology. Describe why technology is not being used to achieve student goals. It gives it a different lens by which technology supports are included. So now is kind of a little bit of time where I'm going to take a deep breath for interpreters and our captioners because I'm going to introduce some of the solutions that we have applied and looked at that we believe are more universally designed for folks who are looking for jobs as well as transition age youth. So particularly, when we are looking at the pre-ETS, the pre-employment training skills and services, many of these kind of technologies and supports can be added into it. I am thrilled to be able to participate with the Communication First team that you will be hearing from on the 3rd session within this webinar series, because communication technologies is so important. Certainly important to employment, but also community living. But the technologies are growing in communication options. Text to speech, speech to text, and augmentative and alternative communication systems are becoming more mainstream technologies than they had been before. Certainly looking at virtual engagement, I will say, looking at crowd testing and looking at accessibility. There's a team called Fable who do crowdsourcing of accessibility, and they have found that Zoom, the platform that we are currently on, is the most accessible currently, but folks are coming up very quickly. But looking at that live captioning and transcription services, because those become paramount, and those should be things that are expected in all of our meetings to allow for accessibility. Looking at task management systems, our colleagues at the American Federation for the Blind went through and listed what they found to be the most accessible task management systems. Apps like Todoist, and I'm sorry, this is going to be hard for the captioners and translators. They're on there. Todoist, Any.do, Wonderlust, and TickTick are several of the apps that are recommended for task management. We're also seeing now more real-time assistance, virtual platforms for real-time assistance. There's a dial-in service called AIRA, A-I-R-A, that was built for people who are blind and have low vision, where they can essentially dial up a service, wear a pair of lens, and have folks interpret what is in front of them. These are new services that we're going to see being able to use now through virtual environments. And the application for training is really being advanced in virtual and augmented reality. Boeing is a large company that's been using augmented reality for trainings. That's one that I think will absolutely become really valuable for people with disabilities in terms of skill development and training. And then there are many new learning management systems, things like Canvas and Blackboard. There's even a group out of the University of Central Florida who have what's called the Universal Design Online Content Inspection Tool that will help you determine if your learning management systems are accessible and apply concepts of universal design. What are some others? Well, we see supportive software, things like writing supports in Grammarly. QuickBooks now have built-in accessibility guides. There are apps upon apps upon apps. Things like Serene for productivity, Calendly for scheduling, and Toggle for time management. There are tools that we really like to look at for work discovery. So when you're looking to planning, there are virtual tools that transform into visual icons, your thinking, your processing. That's mind mapping. Coggle is a great app for that. And then the nuance of virtual job shadowing. You know, when we talk about the challenges of work-based learning experiences, there are more opportunities now to do virtual job shadowing than there were before. Tools for job applications. I know Jennifer mentioned their online resumes, their video resumes. There's virtual reality job interviews now that the Kessler Foundation is focusing on. Again, augmented reality and multimedia portfolios. And then there's always built-in accessibility. And I challenge you to always look at the things you know, because the built-in accessibility features in mainstream technologies are generally there. There's a lot of options to be able to find what that is. So looking at accessibility features, closed captioning, and many more. And cognitive, you're now going to start to see in some of these major programs and products, cognitive accessibility features. What about post-secondary education and vocational training? Well, certainly looking at Think College and other opportunities, cyber.org is a great group funded under NIST that has curriculum across the lifespan to learn about cybersecurity. Microsoft Learning has opened up a whole bunch of their new learning strategies online during COVID. So there's many opportunities to apply now. One of the things that I think is becoming very evident when we start to look at the transition out of school into vocational rehab as well as into the new workforce is having people understand their own technology platform, their own technology portfolio. So when you write a resume, you will put what technologies, I'm proficient at Microsoft Office. I can use spreadsheets out of Excel. What we need to start doing is reinforcing the use of technologies and creating a technology portfolio so people can share what they use. We're seeing this new movement in employment to what's called hyper customization, meaning that employers are looking more and more to support their employees by the products and services that they are comfortable with. And so now, as we see employers moving more remotely, we see them using new technologies, we also see them opening to their employees using the technologies they are comfortable with. So the thought of creating within a virtual resume a technology portfolio or maintaining a portfolio of the technologies people have used and are proficient at is going to be valuable, especially when they're starting new jobs. Oftentimes we'll say, employers will say, yeah, we want to use technologies, we just don't know what's out there. Do you know what's out there? So being able to showcase this is something that can be very helpful. So you can do that through StoryMe apps or personal web pages. As we heard, skill development is looking more and more online. People can use those YouTube videos, I know there has been, at least in my household and many others that I know of, a virtual shift from paper manuals to online manuals, and looking at a video before you read a manual. There's more interest in mixed reality training and skill development, online courses, and we're now seeing what is called credential stuffing. And what that means is people have opportunities to get greater credentials now that they're online. And credential stuffing is gathering those credentials while people have opportunities to do more and more online trainings. Informational access, it's one of the key components that we focus on at the Coleman Institute, is ensuring people have access to information. And there are new things that are coming out that do plain and simple language immediately using machine learning and algorithms. There's a program called Easy Reading that comes out of the UK that transforms web content even into pictures and images. Content Clarifier comes out of IBM, which is a text simplification. There are many free online tools to use. And then there's also new and open source Bookshare by Benetech is an example of accessible books for people. And then finally, when we look at self-advocacy, we're seeing more and more virtual meetings. Our group here in Colorado is called Speaking for Ourselves Colorado, SFO. They have meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays, opportunities to build in social media, and again, looking at that communication first initiative to allow people opportunities to communicate. And I'm going to finally talk through a couple technology supports and solutions, things that we have seen over time and have been a part of that we think are very valuable globally. So we focus a lot of our time at the Institute on accessible technology, particularly cognitively accessible technology. Looking at the web, there are new standards within WCAG, which is the World Wide Web Consortium's version of accessibility. You'll know WCAG 2.1 is the most recent version. There's now Silver that is an adoption that has higher levels of cognitive accessibility into it. Here in Colorado, we established for really as a great response to COVID, a emergency response desktop that helps people look at communication, accessible information, and digital skill learning. We have our colleagues that we have supported over time at the TIP Squad in Connecticut, where they are now doing virtual 1 minute, 2 minute tutorials on technology. And folks there are now, that TIP Squad is training each other and they're doing coding to build those skill sets, those marketable job skill sets. They're using Scratch, which is a platform for coding. And then we have our colleagues out of Washington that have Access CS for All, which is computer science access to curriculum. Digital literacy skills, which is one that everybody is looking for. Where's the curriculum? Where can we find it? Um, you know, thinking about digital citizenship, there's a major fear, I think, where when we talk to folks about technology, when we talk to the gatekeepers, it often comes down to this fear of privacy and security. And there is a very real fear there. There is a reason for that. However, we also don't have enough information about how we educate people on how to be digital citizens, how to be able to know whether or not they're posting something that's safe or not. Did I friend somebody who was safe? These are areas of self-direction that we really need to start to invest in. We need to start to train and educate people how to use social media in a safe way, but without restricting access. It is not our job, as I say, to keep people away from technology, but teach them how to be self-determined and self-direct the way they interact with that, and allow them that dignity of risk. How do people manage their own data? I don't know that many of us even know how we manage our own data. There's ways to use curriculum that help with that kind of safety. I Keep Safe is one curriculum, as well as common sense education that can help with that digital citizenship skills. I know, and I completely agree with my colleague Jennifer when she talked about financial literacy and how it's limited for this population, and understanding budgeting and digital payments. We're moving into a very different form of how there's still arguments about now digital money versus paper money and where we're going to transform to. COVID has really rejuvenated those conversations. So looking at ways that people can use real money, and learn about budgeting and apply that skill is really important. Clarity is one of the apps as well. I would say, certainly looking at the app that Jennifer has for her group, as well as the Spendy she mentioned, are others. And then our colleagues at Bridging Apps have a list of good apps for looking at any criteria areas. They do a nice job of selecting and going through. So cybersecurity, and we're seeing gaming and robotics. So these are all already available kind of technology solutions. But I think it's also critical that we start to think about the future, because this is a community that can drive the innovation. They know they have the authentic experience to be able to drive innovation. And so when we start to think about exploring and teaching technologies, we need to think of the technologies of the future. Things like ubiquitous artificial intelligence, intelligent spaces. How do we move in environments? That's going to be one that I think can be very valuable for this community. Wearables are going through the roof, what we can use those wearables for. How do we gauge health and wellness using wearables, as well as emotional states? Digitally extended realities. There's a great team out of Cornell and Verizon Media who are working on accessible mixed realities. So what does accessible virtual reality look like, and how can it be applied? The voice economy, which I hope my colleagues at Communication First will mention. The voice economy isn't a disruptive technology. The using your voice to start and stop anything has been grown exponentially in products, and it's something that can be opening for folks, but it also can close the door for folks. And then also robots and cobots. Cobots being a robot that helps you through a piece of a task, are being used significantly. So thinking about when we're designing things to the future of that. I will say that, when we're looking at the Coleman Institute and the activities that we're engaged in, we have that emergency response desktop right now to respond to COVID that's being looked at by multiple states. We have folks looking at contextually aware haptic communication systems. That means the sense of touch, and how to use that as a communication system, both expressive and receptive. We have folks working on accessible data visual analytics. How do you transform visual analytics to be accessible? Understanding from our research, certainly in the state of the states, pie charts can be more difficult for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities to read than other forms of data. looking at accessible manuals for technology, as well as augmented reality for daily living skills. As I mentioned, we've worked with our folks in peer-to-peer technology training. We think that's a very influential area, creating champions of technology. We have folks, they're called our Declaration Champions in New York, who train everyone who comes into their service agency the importance of technology to them. So they're building it into the culture. We've worked again also on video resumes and multimedia portfolios, recognizing the importance of that video as well as demonstrating needs and strengths and skill sets and including technology into that. And then finally, technology first. So we've talked through a lot of the practical applications in this. We've talked a lot about the tangible things that can be used. Now let's talk just for a moment in concluding about systems change and how there are systems change efforts going on that you can be a part of as well. So in 2013, the Coleman Institute launched with our national partners what was the rights of people with cognitive disabilities to technology and information access. It was our attempt at demonstrating how the importance of the right to technology and information access needed to be incorporated. This was something that at the time, became adopted by the President's Committee on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. The FCC adopted it as one of a guiding principles in cognitive accessibility, really looking at those principles on how to roll out the right to technology. But this is growing. The right to technology and the technology being treated as a utility is only growing. We've seen it on the global scale, being presented at the World Health Organization in their global corporation on health technology research. There's now a Bologna Declaration on assistive technologies. More and more people are realizing, because of the ubiquity of technology, we need to ensure also that right to technology. At the Coleman Institute, we've focused in the Coleman Institute and our project of national significance, the State of the States, we've focused on what is technology first. Technology first, if you have not heard about it, really started in 2017 as a movement, but has changed to a framework for systems change, where really technology, the purpose of it, technology being considered first in the discussion of support options available to individuals and families through person-centered approaches to promote meaningful participation, social inclusion, self-determination, and quality of life. So technology first is being adopted across the states as an initiative. And why are states investing in technology first? Well, it solves many of the pressing problems of our community today. It promotes, first and foremost, it is promoting autonomy, self-direction, and community integration. When we look at what community living is, high quality community living, you have to incorporate technology as a part of the community. It also addresses the direct care professional workforce shortages that we're seeing across our nation. Technology helps to drive more efficient and effective practices, greater cost efficiencies, and addresses the need to embrace innovative solutions, which is why states across the US are starting to adopt and embrace technology first. Much like some of our other systems change models, it starts with this core set of values, much of which have been adopted and resemble those written in our rights document to technology and information access. We begin with a team. We identify some resource allocations, understanding that communication, again, that communication is so key, being able to dispel myths about technology. So much I see of the challenges with technology is our own personal fears of that. Kevin Kelly, who is a futurist, wrote very eloquently about this, talking about us all being newbies forever, that the landscape of technology is constantly changing, that we have to become one with this state of flux, understanding that we'll never be proficient, but we're always going to be newbies. And so educating people about that status and about the disruptions that technology is causing, as well as the benefits. that can occur. Technology first helps disrupt that status quo through the innovation, trying to think of how systems can work differently. We leverage through collaborations, build capacity both by service providers and family members and our advocates, giving them the capacity to be able to use technologies and train each other, and also using fidelity and data-driven decision-making. Across the US, we've seen a number of technology consortiums that we've been engaged in, those that are using technology first language, but looking to these different states who have already started the conversation about technology first and large adoptions of technology. We hope you are seeing some of your states on this list. Oops. And we just recently, with our colleagues at the National Association of State Directors of Developmental Disability Services, produced a technology report from their policy work group about why people are embracing technologies and some of the solutions and strategies they're using to do so. But when we start to talk about firsts, okay, we have in our field, let's be honest, we have a lot of firsts, and not everything can be a first. But you have to look at it in a different format. So what I like to, we often hear folks who get challenged and say, well, these are competing entities, all are first, when really they're not. They're complementing efforts. So just taking the three, person first, technology first, and employment first. Well, person first always begins at the person at the center, driving decisions and activities, which is embraced both in technology first and employment first. Technology first uses technology as humanity's equalizer to help achieve outcomes. It is that solution, that bridge, that accelerator that helps people to achieve outcomes, with employment being the preferred outcome. So allowing some of the other system change efforts, and particularly the alignment of technology first and employment first. Again, we emphasize the person first, making sure the person is at the center. Technology adoption can be seen in all phases of the employment life cycle. So when we're looking from beginning pre-employment skills all the way to career advancement, technology can be used across that entire life cycle to augment outcomes. It helps to reimagine the 21st century employer and employee relationships. It's outcome driven, looking at that as an outcome in implementing practices, and is rights based to really help us fulfill what are the goals of the ADA. And so how can you initiate? How can you be involved in these efforts? Well, if you don't already have a technology first or employment first efforts, you can be engaged in that initiation, identifying advisory councils and grassroots partners to drive the implementation. Clearly, we leverage through collaborations. This is where the innovation and disruption really comes in. When we went to establish our emergency response desktop here in Colorado, we looked to our collaborators. We knew something had to be done fast. We knew it had to be done effectively, and we knew we had to use the strengths of our partners to make it happen. We were able to use our ARC, our DD Council, and our enabling technologies, as well as our USED, to be able to use those collaborations and create something new to address COVID. We look where there are causal relationships when modernizing policies and collecting data. So being able to overlap those and see what may be, if we use technology, do we see greater outcomes in employment? Look for opportunities to combine activities, so pilot programs on technology and in employment. Learn from partners in other states. Look to greater efficiencies and sustainability, long-term sustainability, and building a culture of innovation. We are a culture where we like to look back and say, we've done this for so many years. It is time for our field to look forward and be the drivers. We have got to be a culture of innovation to ensure that there is equal access, and to make sure that we are not creating what are these new walls of isolation and segregation for people with disabilities, which are now going to be the technology institutions rather than physical institutions. And it's going to take all of our collective ingenuity to make sure that we enhance technology for people with disabilities. So with that, I am going to say thank you. I think I am a minute over my time, and shift over to Allie, possibly.
Sure. Thank you, Shea. Wow, that was awesome. I know we have saved some time for question and answer. So if we received a couple in the chat box throughout.
Okay.
I know.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop my share, but I will put my contact information in the chat for people.
Sure. So Will sent a question in and said, how do you think ableism can be ended in technology for people with disabilities to be more included? I think you really kind of touched on that just right at the end, which was really powerful. Okay. But if you want to elaborate a little more.
No, I think we really have to shift the culture. I mean, we still struggle quite a bit. And we actually were talking about this prior to the presentation, that there's still these systemic barriers and attitudinal barriers to people using technology. But we have to really enhance people's power. We have to empower individuals to have those skills. What we haven't really done a great job of is empowering people through knowledge-based skills. How many folks do we know with significant disabilities that are interested in cybersecurity, who are, using gaming to be able to do new skills? We haven't really embraced that, and I think it's time that we do that, because if we don't, we're constantly going to be creating these cycles of reliance and cultures where it's the revolving door of people being reliant upon others as opposed to self-directing and having their own autonomy.
Great, thank you. We've had a couple questions regarding your presentation and materials. So we have those up on our website. There's a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, both in the PowerPoint format as well as PDF for accessibility purposes. I'll put the link to that in the chat box once again. You'll also receive it in the follow-up email directly from Zoom. And then again, at the end of the post-event survey. Do you have any workshops for families to attend at your institute?
Oh, very good question. So we are an institute that doesn't really do direct service. So we don't provide any direct service. We do more national and international training and work on policy and procedures. But a lot of what we do is research-based. So as I said, we've got those programs where students are working on haptics and virtual kind of accessible visual analytics. So we engage people in those processes, but we're not really in the job of doing direct kind of trainings for families unless we're invited to do so, which we do on a regular basis now. So that it's not like a series of presentations that we provide.
Great, thank you. We had another question of how do you think we move larger systems towards funding technology?
Good question. The first, that is a lot of what Technology First does. So Technology First is looking at a lot of the policies within service delivery systems or within Medicaid systems or others to identify ways to fund or braid or blend funding. I do think predominantly one of our primary barriers right now is the language we use. We are very honed in on language that prevents us from going to mainstream technologies. And so modernizing our policies so that we can use innovative and future emerging technologies. So building those policies so that we can adopt future technologies is really, I think, part of the critical piece. We are hearing a lot more from states who are using terms like technology solutions, that allows them the greater flexibilities. But I don't think it's something that out of service delivery systems, there is any confusion that it's limited and that we need to figure out ways to go outside of the market. Some of the research we did with NASDs demonstrated that on average in states, there are 12 different funding authorities that can be used that are federal funding authorities that can be used to purchase technology. That does not include the foundations, the grants, the local communities, the mill levy funds in some communities that can be used to get technology. And we just have not been really creative in looking at those solutions. We often say, well, there's just no funding. I no longer believe that. I believe that there is funding, we have to find it. And one of the jobs of the Assistive Technology Act programs, one of their core functions, is to be able to list those funding opportunities. So I invite you with the funding to also look at those within your state, the AT Act programs, because they should direct you in your state as to funding opportunities. Where I see the biggest challenge and where we've seen the biggest challenge in the rollout of our emergency response desktop has been, we can give people the tech hardware, the evidence-based software, and training. So we provide 2 trainings a week for people to do that. We can send them the technology in the box. It is getting people, frankly, to open the box. And it is those gatekeepers who have insecurities or just are unaware of the technologies to be able to help open the box. And so that's where the training and technical assistance really needs to come in helping families, service providers understand and be able to use those technologies.
Great, thank you for answering that one.
Mm-hmm.
Another one came through, if direct support professionals aren't being taught about opportunities you speak about, then we have high mountains to climb. Is your state teaching DSPs more about technology?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. We often throughout, time have been asked, what is the greatest credentialing? The gold standard is out of RESNA, and they are the AT specialist training. However, it requires a master's degree and high levels to be able to go into that. There's actually a new program that is out that is training DSPs specifically. It's a pilot program that we're working with that I serve on an advisory council for, that is looking for specifically that, training folks around kind of applications of new technologies. But I think there are opportunities here. So when we talk to providers, we find that there is a cultural gap or a generational gap in using technologies, and we're not allowing the DSPs the freedom to be able to use the technologies they know, to leverage what they already know. I mean, the most innovative DSPs are using the technologies that they use every day to enhance what are the services for the folks they work with. We have a team here in Colorado who has, if you can imagine, an Uber program. They have Uber for family support. So imagine you have an app where you need respite, and there are providers that have already been approved. You buy in and you can have 4 providers within your local area who you trust and know do respite. So what we haven't done is really leverage the expertise of younger generations, empower DSPs to use and leverage the technology they use in day-to-day interactions.
Perfect. Yep. So Tia's asking if you can speak quickly about the SAVE manuals that you worked on together about technology.
I'm sorry, the manuals. Oh, the SAVE manuals. Thank you, Tia. Absolutely. So a couple of years ago, we sponsored out of the Coleman Institute what was declaration grants. So we called the Rights to People with Cognitive Disabilities and Technology Information Access, the Declaration for short, because it's a very long phrase. And we were able to fund several programs in different states, the TIP Squad being one, as well as SAVE, to develop technology manuals. So we certainly agreed that the folks to train our peers. And so we've funded the support, but it was really done out of SAVE to create a second version of their technology handbook. So there's version 2, so there's version 1 and version 2, as well as some training videos around nuanced technologies. So I believe those include kind of video chat. They also involve some privacy and security. Again, created for folks with cognitive disabilities by people with cognitive disabilities. And they're on their website. It's a bit hard to navigate, but if you navigate through technology initiatives, I believe you can find it. Tia, you can help me on that to see if they're there. But we really want to see long-term. We've been partnering and working slowly with some folks out of Silicon Valley in their media relations teams to be able to partner with people with cognitive disabilities, to be able to share their stories about technology use. The purpose of that is twofold. One, to be able to educate high-tech companies around how to be appropriate advocates and use appropriate language and representation, as well as being able to provide self-advocates and advocates in general, family members and providers, to share a story using some really advanced media solutions. So we're starting that. That's going to be part of our technology alliance, where we really want to invest in the community. It's all about investing with people with disabilities to be empowered to use that tech, share their story, and then create jobs out of it.
Great, thank you. We had another question. How do we energize creativity and technology among case managers and counselors?
Yep, it's a scary thing. I think, first of all, it's educating them around what technology rules are available. So as I mentioned, it's not that there aren't funding authorities available, it's that people don't necessarily know or use them. And so first is kind of educating folks about what opportunities are available, and then giving people the ownership and empowerment to be able to say, yes, I do want technology built into my plan. I want you to tell me why we are not using it as a solution. And then give those case managers the opportunities and flexibilities to be able to move in technology space. So oftentimes they're not educated either about technology solutions. So that becomes another area of emphasis. It's across the board, and it's a challenge. We can't all be, as I said, we're all newbies. We all are constantly learning. We all have to accept that we're constantly learning, but also be open to innovation. So I do think part of it is being able to do that system navigation and have people knowledgeable about the opportunities that are present, because we can show from our data out of the state of the states, our national data, we've been tracking expenditures for technology since 2007, and it is grossly underfunded. And it's not that the funds aren't there. So when we look at applications for HCBS waivers, it's written into the applications, they just are not utilized, which means it's a challenge of filtering the information down through case managers. So I hope that answered your question. Thank you, Tia, for posting. The saveusa.org is their site, and the manuals on how to get to the Technology 1 handbook and Technology 2 handbook, as well as some videos. They had some that came out with the first version of Technology handbook and then the second. So those should all be available through the SAVE website.
Yes, and once we find those, I was trying to look for them. And once we find them, we can add them to the resources under your section on the website as well. So there's another question. Are there any courses or certifications recommended regarding supporting technology assessments or AT assessments specifically to enhance the service delivery of employment service providers?
So how to do assessments. So some of the things I think you need to be, and this goes back to procuring technology, think about the difference between assessments and feature matching. So I don't know about you, but I wasn't assessed to get my own phone. So there are certainly solutions that people can use, but you want to think about features, where their alignment with features are pretty simplistic. So if someone doesn't have has mobility challenges or has different challenges, you're going to look at different solutions right off the bat. That's more feature matching. However, if you're looking at more complex systems, we would refer you straight to an AT specialist or those out of the assistive technology realm when you're looking at specialized equipment. I think there's a lot that can be done in your own investigation. So some of the challenges we hear from service providers in general, or case managers or employment specialists is, yeah, these are all great, but I have no idea where to start. I have no idea where to start to look for a technology solution. And that's why we say you have to start with the goal. So if I know the goal of the individual is to learn how to, be a chef, say I want to be a chef. So I'm going to start looking at online curriculum. I'm going to start to look at solutions like the refrigerators that tell me when things have expired. GE has them now. I'm going to start to look at those solutions that align with the individual's goals. And that's going to narrow down my focus pretty significantly. And so I really encourage you to think about assessment in a different type of way. You don't want to assess the person, you want to strengthen the person. And you want to be able to justify the technology solutions in the goal attainment.
Perfect. I was just able to find one of the manuals, so I will put
Thanks.
that in the link or in the chat box. Another question came through from Anna. Do you have any trainings or programs for kids in transition or close to transition to encourage their creativity and skills to open good opportunities for their future?
Awesome. So I think there are some really cool online programs now. I mean, I mentioned the cyber.org, which is a curriculum for cybersecurity that now has open modules. I have asked them, they are working on an accessible version of that now, but there are still tools there. I think there's a lot of creative forums now. So we've seen a lot and we've participated in a lot of hackathons, make-a-thons, etc. These are great forums for students to be able to foster their pre-employment skills and to try out new jobs, is to be able to do some of these contests, the quote unquote contests. And almost, you know, we have looked, there are contests for emerging scholars, there are contests for emerging architects. But looking to that as a fun and interactive way to get students engaged in some different curricular content. I did mention CS for All, which is computer science, but these students now, I mean, if they're coming up now, many of them have exposure to technology themselves and are pretty savvy. And so we have to allow them to leverage what they're doing. And be able to expand upon where they already sit. So if they're into gaming, they can do much more into gaming of, say, a different discipline. I think that helps foster some of the career adaptations. And again, these online, what are now competitions, can be a great way and a great form into a career. And I do want to, before I lose the chance, say thank you to our interpreter as well. You've done an amazing job, as well as our captioner. So thank you so much. Greatly appreciated.
Yes, thank you. I think our questions have kind of slowed down. So at this time, I'm just going to make a couple quick announcements at the end here. Let's switch the screen up. Shea, thank you so much. This has been really informative. We're getting great raving reviews in the chat, and I'm already seeing some responses come through on our survey. So, and so please join us next week. So we have Tana and Bob Williams from Communication First. They're going to share about communication as job one. Communication and employment. This is so important, and I'm really thankful that they're able to kind of wrap up our series here and really drive home the importance of communication. So if you haven't already, please follow us. That's the link to our website on Facebook and Twitter to stay connected. We'll have all these resources up on the page. And we thank you so much for joining. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.